I have the honour of welcoming Bill Evans for his keynote address. I don't think it's any exaggeration to say that in Bill's time as Commissioner of the Boston Police Department, he transformed relationships within Boston's communities, and we're excited to learn of his experiences. Bill.
I've been in policing for 41 years now, 38 with the Boston Police, and now 3 years here at Boston College. And, I've loved every minute of it. I sort of was brought up in Boston, still live in Boston, raising my 3 children, in South Boston, which obviously has a rich tradition of being a wholly, Irish community. St. Patrick's Day Parade is probably the biggest day in our community. And so, obviously, it's a big day. And this is quite an honor for me. I loved when I went to Belfast 3 years ago as the U.S. Council to talk about community building. I just usually talk about where I came from. I grew up in a sort of a poorer working class neighborhood in the city of Boston. And when I was a young kid, my mother died when I was just an infant, so I don't really have a memory of my mom. And I lost a brother and my father by the time I was 14. So I was basically on my own. And, what happened is I had a local priest step into my life and basically get me into a good high school, a prep school, which I always say I didn't have the brains to get in there, or did I have the money? But that was an opportunity of a lifetime, and that's really shaped who I am. The community basically came around and supported me as I grew up. And I always say I wouldn't be where I was if that local priest didn't step into my life. So that's shaped my whole philosophy on policing and how important community is, especially dealing with youth. Over my 38 years in policing, I started in 1980 as a lonely cadet, studied hard, and eventually rose to, be commissioner of Boston for almost 5 years. Now, my oldest brother also was the police commissioner in Boston for 10 years. And I had 2 Boston firemen. So we were clearly a public service family, but being in that neighborhood, that's what it was all about. And so, I love being a policeman, a lot of challenges, as and I know you'll hear from Molly Baldwin from Roca dealing with some of the gang issues in the city and some of the violence. I know you'll hear from Reverend Mark Scott, who's a good partner with Operation Homefront, and Andrea Lawrence, who deals with Youth Connect. Important programs to make Boston a closer knit community. But I had a lot of challenges as I came up. The Boston Marathon bomb. I had just finished that race running that day. And for the next 5 days as the chief of patrol, that was my role to find out who did it and who was responsible. And, I was happy to lead the final scene in Watertown when we basically captured that second terrorist. So, that was a big, big issue, and it's really changed for what Boston. But the good thing is it brought Boston closer together. You've heard Boston Strong, and that's the community relationships that we've had over the years. And so shortly after that, I became police commissioner, dealing with a lot of issues, and of course, violence being the top of it. And what we're here for today, the whole idea of community building and partnership. I realized, again, from when I was a young, kid on the street, how important the community is. And we had all kinds of programs here in the city. And our main goal was to strengthen relationships, especially with the Black community. I think Boston has always had a history of having racial tensions. And how do you bring the police closer to the Black community? And, I enjoy doing the community police part of my job. We built some great relationships to the point when I left, I think we had like an 81% approval rating from residents in the city of Boston. That came with a lot of hard work. We developed a lot of great programs such as peace walks 3 or 4 times a week, where I would walk with Mayor Walsh, who obviously is a big Irishman. He was my boss. We'd walk the streets of some of the most troubled neighborhoods, knocking on doors, meeting residents. And we did about 3 or 4 times a week. And we had police leaders, we had the Black clergy, we had residents, and That was highly successful, but it was a good way to bring together the community and especially the youth. One of the big things I did also was I put more police officers in the schools, not to be there to be a deterrent, but to build relationships at an early age. A lot of these young kids are told very early that somehow the police are bad. I always found I wanted my officers in the schools reading to the young children so they get to know the police and they get to respect the police. And that was a great program. I love to go in and read to the kids. I always enjoy that. But I always look for ways, how do we bring the police closer to the kids? And one of the biggest things I did was spend $80,000 on an ice cream truck that had the BPD all over it. And my officers drove around in an ice cream truck and they gave out free ice cream to the kids and the elderly. And if you told me 36 years ago that police would want to get behind the wheel of an ice cream truck, I'd say you're crazy. But trying new initiatives, new ideas, I tried everything. We had Zumba in the park. We put on programs where our officers would do Zumba exercise in the park. We had bike rides for peace. I kept challenging all my staff. What are we doing that we haven't tried? And one of the big issues I had was having a Father's Day march in the Black community. We've traditionally had Mother's Day marches, which is attended by thousands, but everyone always was sort of troubled by the fact that there's not enough Black fathers in the family. And I said, there's plenty of good fathers in the community. And I established a Father's Day march in the Black. So it was continually focusing on how can we make the community closer together. We ran tennis programs. We were involved in soccer leagues. We did everything we could to bring kids and the police together. And it really worked well. And when you talk about Youth Connect, which you'll hear in one of the sessions, the whole idea of that program is having social workers in our police stations. So we don't bring especially young kids into the criminal justice system. We turn it over to the social workers. And again, if you told me 35 years ago that we would have social workers working alongside in police stations with the police, I would say you're crazy. But they were such a valuable asset, as you'll hear. When we have a troubled kid, child, now, instead of bringing them into the criminal justice system, we turn them over to the social workers. And they get them the resources, the social services they need. And that's one of our best programs. And you'll hear more about that later. You'll hear about Homefront from Reverend Mark Scott. Now, Mark is a Black clergy, probably one of my best pals and one of the biggest advocates to stop the violence in the city. He's going to talk about how if we had a troubled young child in the schools who was heading down the wrong path and might get involved in gangs and guns, we would pay home visits to his house. We would accompany Reverend Scott and his team, along with social workers, and make an intervention into that child's life. And that program was very, very successful. So you'll hear from Mark. Mark is also in charge of the trauma response team in Boston. So if we're at a homicide scene, heaven forbid, Mark's people come out and talk to young children who might have been impacted by the violence on the street. So, it's continually engaging the community in making sure that everybody's working together in partnership. And a lot of those programs were very, very successful. And it was all about bringing the community together. Boston, I want to say, is probably one of the safest communities in our country. Obviously the U.S. has way too many guns. I always say I was a big advocate against guns. I think every year in our country, I think we have 40,000 people killed by handguns. I think, almost 2/3 of those are by suicide. How do we get the guns so they're not so readily available? About 2 weeks ago here, we had a young dad walking down the street with his 7-year-old, and he accidentally fired his gun and injured the young child. Getting guns off the street and make kids, young children, safe that's what it's all about. And I'm happy to say, over my 5 years in the city, we built some great, strong community relationships. And we reduced crime by 25% when I was here. But the most important thing we did, and me and Mayor Walsh were the most proud of, we reduced arrests altogether in our city by 25%. So we reduced crime by not locking people up. We always said we want to do it by lifting people up. And we did that with a lot of these great community programs that we did. You know, we had a lot of youth police dialogues throughout our 11 police districts where the youth would come in and speak to the police and tell them what is on their mind. Why do they have the antagonism towards the police? And we get to build these relationships, believe it or not. And that really went a long way, listening to the youth's concern and them listening to our difficult role. And, you know, we have a difficult role because we want to make the community safe. And sometimes in trying to get some guns off the street, there's this antagonistic relationship. And so we were all about how can we bring communities together? And I loved the work I did. After 38 years, you know, I came here to Boston College and, you know, I continue to help any way we can. Now, Mayor Walsh, now he's the labor secretary to President Obama. He's doing great work in DC, and I continue to help in any way I can here in the city. But the whole idea of community building, which I know this forum today is all about, that's the best work we can do. You know, the community wants trust in their institutions, especially in their police. You know, we had a tough go of it here in America, as you know, with, you know, Black Lives Matter, the George Floyd, murder and everything after it. So our job is even tougher here. We have to somehow earn the respect and the trust of the community we police. And there's no way better to do that than with the youth, because we need them to work alongside us in partnership. So as they grow older, they get to learn, they get to trust us and respect us. And so, you know, I just want to thank everyone for having me here today. I love the work I do. You know, I got a good chance to go to Belfast, and I tell not a funny story, but when I arrived last time with the speakers program, they said, we're going to bring you to an integrated school. And now living in Boston and being part of the whole integration back in the busing in the 1970s, right away I thought black and white. And I went to the school, and it was the cutest school, and it was basically the religious differences in that school. But when I thought integrated, integration here is a lot different meaning than integration there. Same issues in the same way we have to bring people together. So there aren't differences where there is antagonism. But I learned a lot in Belfast. I love Belfast. I got to run down around the Titanic and, you know, a lot of cool. It's a great city. Visited some of the bars, which I loved. And, you know, I just think it's a great city. But my main purpose here today is, you know, you got to keep up the great work and bringing communities together. Believe it or not, Boston and Belfast are sister cities, and we have a lot of the same differences, and we have a lot of similarities. But I can't stress enough how important it is to try new initiatives like I did. You know, the ice cream truck and all this stuff. People thought it was crazy, but you got to think outside the box on ways to bring children together, institutions together, and obviously the police with the community. And I think, you know, I miss what I do. I'm teaching here at Boston College. I'm sort of a parent to 15,000 students, I like to think. Different issues. I sleep a lot better, believe it or not, because I'm not getting all the calls that I used to get. But here, I get the same philosophy. Building trust and respect and being out with the kids and the students to make sure they're safe and they trust the police. So I just want to thank everyone, whether it's, you know, the representatives in DC and the council and everyone for putting this together. You know, partnerships, you can't do it alone. We need our children. We need new initiatives. And that's the way I think the Boston Police and I have been successful, because growing up as a young kid, I didn't have a whole lot, but I realized how important community can really help the youth.